The stars looked different today. Commander Jinwoo Park stood on the bridge of the colony ship Harmony, watching the navigation screen show their progress toward Kepler 442b. 50,000 humans slept in the cryopods below, dreaming of their new home. After 3 years in deep space, they were only 2 weeks away from their destination. Jinwoo rubbed his tired eyes. The responsibility of leading humanity's first deep space colony weighed heavily on his shoulders. Every decision he made affected the lives of everyone aboard. He had been chosen for this mission because of his steady leadership and careful planning. The Earth government trusted him to establish humanity's first foothold in another star system. "Commander, we're detecting some unusual readings on the long-range sensors," reported Lieutenant Yuna Lee from her engineering station. She was young but brilliant, one of the best engineers Earth had ever produced. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her fingers moved quickly across the control panels. "What kind of readings?" Jinwoo asked, moving to look over her shoulder at the data scrolling across her screen. Multiple large objects approaching from the outer system. They're moving fast, faster than anything we've seen before. The energy signatures don't match any known technology. Yuna's voice carried a note of concern. Jinwoo felt a chill run down his spine. They had always known there was a possibility of encountering alien life, but everyone hoped their first meeting would be peaceful. The ships approaching them were clearly not from Earth, and their aggressive approach pattern suggested hostile intentions. "Wake up the security team," Jinwoo ordered. "Get Minho Kim to the bridge immediately." Minho Kim had been a Marine for 12 years before joining the colony mission. He was responsible for the safety of everyone aboard the Harmony. When the call came through the ship's communication system, he was already awake, running his daily equipment check. Something felt wrong today, though he couldn't explain what. He arrived on the bridge within minutes, still pulling on his uniform jacket. "What's the situation, Commander?" "Unknown ships approaching. Multiple contacts, moving at impossible speeds." Jinwoo pointed to the main screen where red dots were rapidly closing on their position. Minho studied the tactical display. His military training told him everything he needed to know. "That's an attack formation. They're surrounding us." The first alien ship appeared on the visual display, and everyone on the bridge fell silent. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of the Harmony. Its hull was dark and covered in strange markings that seemed to glow with their own light. More ships materialized around them, forming a perfect circle. "Incoming transmission," reported Communications Officer Jiho Nam. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the controls. "Put it through," Jinwoo commanded. A voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect English, though with a strange, hissing quality. "Human vessel, you have entered territory claimed by the Vorthak Empire. Your species is unknown to us. Prepare to be boarded for evaluation and processing." Jinwoo stepped forward. "This is Commander Jinwoo Park of the Earth colony ship Harmony. We come in peace. We're simply passing through to reach our destination planet." Harsh laughter echoed through the speakers. "Peace is irrelevant. You will comply with boarding procedures or your vessel will be destroyed. Resistance will result in casualties." Minho moved closer to Jinwoo. "Commander, we have some defensive capabilities, but against ships that size—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Large metallic tubes extended from the alien ships, attaching to the Harmony's hull with loud, clanging sounds. The ship shuddered under the impact. "Hull breach in sectors 7 and 12, Yuna reported, her voice tight with fear. "They're cutting through our outer walls." All security teams to defensive positions, Minho announced over the ship's intercom. This is not a drill. We are being boarded by hostile forces. The first aliens came through the breached hull, wearing strange armor that made them look like giant reptiles. They moved with terrifying speed and precision. Each stood over 7 feet tall with scaled skin and glowing yellow eyes. In their clawed hands, they carried weapons that hummed with energy. The human security teams tried to resist, but their conventional weapons barely scratched the alien armor. Within minutes, the aliens had taken control of critical ship systems. They moved through the corridors with the confidence of a species that had done this many times before. Overlord Thex led the boarding party personally. This was his specialty, evaluating new species for their potential as slaves in the Vorthak Empire. The humans seemed physically weak compared to most species they had encountered, but they would serve adequately in the mines and factories. Secure all life forms, Thex commanded his soldiers. Standard processing protocols. Separate the adults from the young. Tag and catalog everything. Minho fought desperately to reach the cryo bay where most of the colonists still slept, but alien soldiers cut off his path. He watched helplessly as they began the systematic capture of his people. Families were torn apart. Children cried for. Parents who were dragged away to different holding areas. Yuna had managed to reach her engineering station one last time. With shaking hands, she initiated an emergency data purge, erasing all information about Earth's location and human technology. If these aliens planned to enslave humanity, at least they wouldn't get the knowledge to find Earth itself. Data core. Wiped, she whispered to herself just before alien hands grabbed her arms. The Vorthak soldiers were efficient and brutal. They moved through the ship like a machine, cataloging humans as if they were cargo. Each person was fitted with a strange, metal collar that seemed to attach itself to their nervous system. The moment the collar clicked into place, a wave of drowsiness and confusion washed over its victim. Jinwoo tried to resist as they dragged him toward the holding area, but the collar around his neck made thinking difficult. His thoughts moved, like thick syrup. The device was doing something to his mind, making it hard to form complex ideas or plan resistance. The neural inhibitor chains are functioning properly, reported Enforcer Grix to his superior. These humans show the expected compliance response. They should make adequate workers once properly conditioned. Thousands of humans were loaded into the cargo holds of the Vorthak ships like livestock. The lucky ones were still unconscious from the cryo-sleep process. Those who were awake could only watch in confusion and terror as their new reality set in. The Harmony was left as an empty shell, drifting toward the planet that would have been humanity's new home. All her people were gone, taken by creatures they had never imagined existed. During the journey to the Vorthak processing world, the humans were kept in large holding cells. The neural collars made it difficult to think clearly, but some awareness remained. Minho found himself pressed against other colonists in a cramped space, barely able to remember his own name. The device around his neck hummed softly, constantly working to suppress his thoughts. Hyunwoo Choi, a quantum physicist who had been among the colony's scientific team, struggled against the mental fog. His trained mind recognized what was happening to them, but the collar made it nearly impossible to form a plan or communicate complex ideas to others. Young Soman Kang, who had been a Special Forces operative before joining the colony, retained enough awareness to observe their captors. Even through the mental haze, she noted their movements, their weapons, their behavior patterns. Some part of her military training still functioned despite the alien technology. The journey took several days. The humans were given minimal food and water, just enough to keep them alive. The Vorthak treated them exactly like livestock being transported to market. There was no attempt at communication or explanation, just the cold efficiency of a system that had processed millions of beings from dozens of species. When they finally arrived at Keth Prime, the massive slave-processing world of the Vorthak Empire, the humans got their first glimpse of their fate. Through small windows in their transport ship, they could see a planet covered in industrial complexes, mining operations, and vast cities. Millions of beings from countless species worked under the watchful eyes of Vorthak overseers. The unloading process was systematic and degrading. Each human was assigned a number, a work category, and a destination. Families who had managed to stay together were deliberately separated. The Vorthak had learned long ago that emotional bonds made slaves less compliant. Jinwoo found himself assigned to a construction detail in the planet's northern continent. As he was loaded onto another transport with hundreds of other humans, he caught sight of Yuna being taken in a different direction. Their eyes met for just a moment across the loading dock, and in that instant, something passed between them, a silent promise that this was not the end of their story. The transport lifted off, carrying its human cargo toward their new lives, as slaves of the Vorthak Empire. But the aliens had made one critical error in their evaluation. They saw humans as weak, easily controlled creatures suitable only for manual labor. They failed to recognize humanity's greatest strength, the ability to adapt, survive, and overcome any obstacle placed in their path. The neural inhibitor chains hummed around 50,000 human necks, designed to keep them docile and compliant. The Vorthak were confident in their technology and their system. They had enslaved countless species using these same methods. They had no idea what they had, just unleashed. 6 months had passed since the humans arrived at Keith Prime. The Vorthak overseers were pleased with their new slaves. The humans worked hard in the mines and construction sites, just like all the other species they had captured over the centuries. The neural inhibitor chains kept them docile and obedient, exactly as designed. But something strange was happening that the aliens had not noticed yet. Hyunwoo Choi worked in the deep crystal mines on the eastern continent. Every day he descended into the dark tunnels with his human work crew to dig out the precious stones that powered Vorthak technology. The collar around his neck made thinking difficult, but not impossible. At first, the mental fog had been overwhelming. Simple thoughts took enormous effort. Planning ahead was nearly impossible. The device was designed to suppress higher brain functions while leaving basic motor skills intact, a perfect tool for creating obedient workers. But Hyunwoo's mind was different. As a quantum physicist, he had spent years training his brain to think in complex patterns. Even under the collar's influence, part of his scientific mind remained active. He began to notice things. The collar sent regular pulses through his nervous system. At first, these pulses disrupted his thoughts completely, but gradually his brain started to adapt. Like water flowing around rocks, his neural pathways began finding new routes. The pulses were still there, but they no longer stopped his thinking entirely. It started small. He could hold a complete thought for a few seconds longer than before. Then he could remember events from earlier in the day with more clarity. After 4 months, he realized he could plan simple actions without the overwhelming confusion that had plagued him initially. The discovery excited and terrified him. If his brain was adapting to the collar, what did that mean for the other humans? Solman, Kang worked in a weapons factory on the southern continent. Her job was to assemble basic components for Vorthak energy rifles. The work was repetitive and mind-numbing, which suited the aliens perfectly. They wanted workers who would not think about what they were building. But Soman's military training ran deeper than conscious thought. Even with the collar suppressing her higher functions, her hands remembered the feel of weapons. Her eyes automatically cataloged weak points in the factory's security. Her body instinctively noted patrol patterns and shift changes. She started to notice that her awareness was returning slowly. Details that had been invisible during her first months of captivity became clear. She could see which guards were lazy, which doors were poorly secured, which areas had fewer surveillance devices. More importantly, she realized she was not the only one changing. Other humans in her work detail were showing signs of increased awareness. They moved with more purpose. Their eyes held intelligence that had been missing for months. The aliens had made a critical error in their understanding of human psychology. They assumed that all species would react to the neural collars in the same way, but human brains were uniquely adaptable. Where other species simply submitted to the technology, humans began to work around it. Jihonam found himself assigned to maintenance work in the Vorthak communications centers. His job was to clean equipment and carry supplies for the alien technicians. The overseers considered it safe work for slaves, since the neural collars prevented any complex understanding of the technology. But as his mind cleared over the months, Jiho began to understand what he was seeing. The communication systems were not as advanced as the Vorthak believed. They relied on predictable patterns and standard protocols. More importantly, they had built-in weaknesses that could be exploited by someone who understood their operation. He started paying attention to conversations between the technicians. The collar made it difficult to remember everything, but he could retain important details for short periods. Piece by piece, he built up a picture of how the Vorthak communication network functioned. One day, while cleaning near a primary console, he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. The technicians were discussing plans to capture more humans from Earth. They had detected signals from humanity's home planet and were planning a massive slave raid. The information burned in his mind. He had to find a way to warn someone, but the collar made it nearly impossible to form complex plans or communicate detailed information. Still, the urgency of the situation pushed him to try. That night, in the slave quarters, he managed to whisper fragments of what he had learned to other humans nearby. The collar fought against his efforts, sending waves of confusion through his thoughts, but desperation gave him strength. Minho Kim was working construction on a new Vorthak military base. The physical labor was brutal, but it was keeping his body strong. More importantly, it was giving him opportunities to observe Vorthak military procedures and weaknesses. As his mental clarity slowly returned, he began to see patterns in the alien behavior. They were overconfident and careless around their slaves. Security was focused outward, against potential threats from other alien species. They never considered that their slaves might pose any danger. The construction work also brought him into contact with humans from other work details during transport and shift changes. Brief conversations were difficult with the collars active, but not impossible. Simple phrases could be exchanged. Basic information could be shared. He started to build a mental map of where humans were located across the planet. Yuna was working in a technology facility on the western coast. Jinwoo was part of a road-building crew in the mountains. Others were scattered across different installations and work sites. The collars prevented complex planning, but they could not stop the basics, human instinct to connect with others. Slowly, carefully, a network of communication began to form between the human slaves. Do-Yun Lee worked in the planet's central archives, organizing data files for Vorthak administrators. It was considered safe work for a slave, since the neural collars prevented understanding of complex information. But as his mind adapted to the collar's effects, he began to comprehend what he was reading. The files contained detailed records of the Vorthak Empire's slave operations. Species after species had been captured, processed, and put to work. Most had submitted completely to the neural collars within weeks of capture. They had become perfect slaves, working until they died without any thought of resistance. But humans were different. The files noted unusual behavioral patterns among human slaves, higher retention of problem-solving abilities, occasional acts of minor defiance that other species never displayed, adaptation rates that exceeded normal parameters. The Vorthak researchers attributed these anomalies to measurement errors or individual variations. They did not recognize the signs of systematic adaptation occurring across the entire human population. Do-Hyun carefully memorized everything he could about the Empire's structure, their weaknesses, and their methods. The information was difficult to retain with the collar active, but each day he managed to hold on to a little more. Yunbi Han worked in food preparation for one of the larger slave compounds. The job gave her access to slaves from many different work details during meal times. She noticed that humans were starting to look different from other enslaved species. Other slaves moved with the shuffling gait of beings whose spirits had been completely broken. They stared at nothing with empty eyes. They spoke only when necessary and then only in simple responses to direct questions. But the humans still had something in their eyes, a spark that the collars had not completely extinguished. They looked at each other with recognition and intelligence. Their movements were becoming more purposeful as the months passed. She began to facilitate quiet conversations during mealtimes. Nothing complex enough to trigger the collar's suppression systems, but meaningful exchanges nonetheless. Information flowed slowly through the network she was helping to create. The Vorthak overseers remained completely unaware of these developments. Their technology had worked perfectly on every other species they had encountered. The neural collars were considered foolproof. The idea that any species could adapt to their control systems was simply inconceivable to them. Overlord Thex reviewed the quarterly reports on human slave productivity. The numbers were acceptable, though not exceptional. Some minor behavioral irregularities had been noted, but nothing that caused concern. Humans appeared to be responding to the collar technology within normal parameters. He had more important concerns than monitoring one batch of slaves. The Empire was planning expansion into new sectors of the galaxy. Fresh conquests meant fresh slaves, and that meant increased profits for his operation. He had no idea that beneath the surface of their apparent compliance, 50,000 human minds were slowly awakening from their enforced sleep. The chains that were meant to bind their thoughts forever were becoming nothing more than an obstacle to work around. The humans were learning. They were adapting, and they were beginning to remember who they used to be. The message traveled slowly through the underground network that had formed among the human slaves. Simple words passed from person to person during brief moments when the guards were not watching. A few syllables shared during work shifts. Whispered. Fragments in the darkness of the sleeping quarters. Tae-Hyun Shin received the message while working in the metal processing plant on the planet's northern continent. The human next to him, a woman named Mian, managed to speak 3 words during a shift change, Earth in danger. Those 3 words hit Tae-hyun like a physical blow. Before his capture, he had been part of the Korean resistance during the corporate wars on Earth. He knew how to organize people in secret. He understood how to build networks that could operate under oppressive conditions. The neural collar made complex planning difficult, but it could not erase years of training and experience. Over the following weeks, he began to reach out to humans in other work details. The process was slow and dangerous. Communications had to be brief and simple to avoid triggering the collar's suppression systems. But gradually, connections formed. The network grew like roots, spreading underground. Each person contacted 1 or 2 others. Information moved in small pieces, passed along chains of trusted individuals. No single person knew the complete picture, which made the network harder for the Vorthak to detect. Yoon Bi-han became a crucial link in the communication system. Her job in food preparation gave her access to humans from across the facility. She developed a simple code using the arrangement of food on serving trays. Different patterns meant different messages. A spoon placed at a certain angle might mean message received. Vegetables arranged in a particular way could indicate danger nearby. The other enslaved species never noticed these subtle communications. Their minds had been completely suppressed by the neural collars. They moved through their daily routines without awareness or curiosity. But humans were different. They watched, they learned, and they remembered. Yuna Lee worked in a technology facility where she was forced to repair Vorthak equipment. As her mental clarity returned, she began to understand the alien technology better than her captors realized. The devices were advanced but not magical. They followed logical principles that could be understood and exploited. She discovered that the neural collars had a weakness. They were designed to suppress complex thought patterns, but they operated on fixed frequencies. If someone could learn to think in different patterns, they might be able to work around the suppression. She began experimenting with meditation techniques, trying to alter her brain wave patterns while the collar was active. It was exhausting, work that left her drained and dizzy, but she started to see results. For brief periods, she could think with complete clarity, despite the device around her neck. The breakthrough came when she realized that the collar could not suppress emotional responses as effectively as logical thoughts. Strong feelings could sometimes overpower the device's influence. Love, anger, determination. These emotions could cut through the mental fog like a knife. She passed this knowledge to others through the underground network. Soon, humans across the planet were learning to use their emotions to break through the collar's control, if only for short periods. Do-hyun Lee continued his work in the Vorthak archives, gathering information about the Empire's structure and weaknesses. What he discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The Vorthak controlled hundreds of worlds and had enslaved dozens of species over thousands of years. Their empire was vast and powerful, but it was also showing signs of decay. The files revealed growing problems with their slave-based economy. Productivity was declining across many worlds. Some species were becoming too broken to be useful workers. Others were dying off from diseases or overwork faster than they could be replaced. The empire needed constant expansion to maintain itself. Fresh conquests provided new slaves and resources to replace what was being lost. If that expansion could be stopped or slowed, the entire system might begin to collapse. More importantly, he learned that the Vorthak had never faced organized resistance from their slaves. Individual acts of defiance occurred occasionally, but systematic rebellion was unknown in their experience. Their security systems were designed to prevent escape, not to handle coordinated uprisings. Minho Kim used his construction work to map the planet's infrastructure. He memorized the locations of power plants, communication centers, transportation hubs, and military installations. The information was shared piece by piece through the network, building a complete picture of the planet's vulnerabilities. He also began identifying other humans with useful skills, former military personnel, engineers, scientists, doctors, people whose knowledge could be valuable in a resistance movement. The network quietly brought these individuals together whenever possible. The humans developed subtle ways to help each other. When someone was sick or injured, others would quietly share food or medicine. When guards were looking for troublemakers, warnings would spread quickly through the network. Small acts of solidarity that reminded them they were not alone. Somin Kang used her position in the weapons factory to learn about Vorthak military equipment. She memorized the design of their energy rifles, noting weak points and failure modes. She observed how their armor functioned and where it could be penetrated. Every detail was carefully stored away for future use. She also began sabotage operations, though on a scale so small that the aliens never noticed. A component installed incorrectly here, a calibration slightly off there. Individual weapons that would malfunction at crucial moments. The defects were subtle enough to appear random, but they would add up over time. Other humans began similar activities in their own work assignments. Machines developed mysterious problems. Computer systems experienced unexplained errors. Projects suffered from accidents that delayed completion. The Vorthak attributed these issues to normal equipment failures and worker incompetence. Jiho Nam continued his work in the communication centers, but now he was actively gathering intelligence. He had learned to read the Vorthak written language well enough to understand basic messages. More importantly, he had figured out how to access communication logs without being detected. The information he gathered was disturbing. The Vorthak were indeed planning a major raid on Earth. They had detected radio signals from humanity's home world and were preparing a massive slave fleet. The attack would capture millions of humans and destroy Earth's ability to resist. But the raid was still months away. The Vorthak moved slowly when planning large operations. They wanted to ensure success and minimize their own losses. This gave the human network time to prepare, though exactly what they could do remained unclear. The most encouraging discovery was that humans were not the only ones adapting to the neural collars. A few individuals from other enslaved species were showing similar signs of recovery. Not many and not as quickly as humans, but enough to suggest that resistance might be possible on a larger scale. Yunseo Park worked as a data analyst in one of the administrative centers. Her job was to process production reports and efficiency statistics. As her mental abilities returned, she began to see patterns in the data that revealed the Empire's true condition. The Vorthak economy was more fragile than it appeared. Their entire system depended on maintaining precise ratios of slave labor to resource extraction to military expansion. If any part of that equation was disrupted, the effects would cascade throughout the Empire. She began to develop a plan, though the neural collar made it difficult to work out all the details. If the human slaves could coordinate their resistance activities across multiple worlds simultaneously, they might be able to cause enough disruption to damage the Empire's stability. The plan would require perfect timing and communication between resistance cells on dozens of worlds. It would need to account for Vorthak military responses and civilian populations. Most importantly, it would need to happen before the raid on Earth could be launched. As the underground network grew stronger, the humans began to realize they were not planning just an escape. They were preparing for war, a war between the most powerful empire in the galaxy and 50,000 slaves who were supposed to be helpless and broken. The neural collars hummed around their necks, still trying to suppress their thoughts and keep them obedient. But the humans had learned to think around the devices, to use emotions and instincts that the technology could not fully control. They were no longer the frightened colonists who had been captured months ago. They were becoming something new, something the Vorthak had never encountered before. They were becoming dangerous. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in the crystal mines. Dong Yun Cho was working the deep tunnels when he felt something change inside his head. The constant humming of the neural collar was still there, but suddenly it felt distant, like background noise he could ignore. For the first time in over a year, his thoughts were completely clear. Dong Yun had been a neurosurgeon on Earth, one of the best in his field. He understood how the human brain worked better than almost anyone. During the long months of captivity, even with his mind clouded by the collar, he had been studying its effects on his own nervous system. The collar sent electrical pulses through, specific nerve pathways to disrupt higher brain functions, but human brains were incredibly adaptable. Over time, his neurons had found new routes around the blocked pathways. Like a river flowing around a dam, his thoughts had learned to bypass the collar's interference. He looked around the mine shaft with new awareness. Everything seemed brighter, sharper. The other humans working nearby still moved with the slow, confused motions of people under the collar's influence. But he could think clearly for the first time since his capture. The feeling lasted only a few minutes before the collar's effects returned, but those minutes were enough. He now knew it was possible to completely overcome the device. More importantly, he understood how to teach others to do the same. That night in the slave quarters, he began sharing his knowledge. The process had to be slow and careful. The collars would detect any sudden changes in brain activity. But gradually, he could guide other humans through the mental exercises needed to build new neural pathways. The information spread through the underground network like fire. Within days, humans across the planet were working to overcome their collars using Dong Yun's techniques. Not everyone succeeded immediately, but more and more people began experiencing moments of complete mental clarity. Hyunwoo Choi was among the first to master the technique completely. His scientific training helped him understand the process and accelerate his progress. When his collar's influence finally broke entirely, the feeling was like stepping out of a dark room into sunlight. He immediately began working with other humans in his mining crew, teaching them the mental exercises. The process was different for everyone, depending on their individual brain patterns and background. But the underlying principle was the same. The human mind could adapt to overcome almost any obstacle. Seo-yeon Kim worked in a weapons storage facility on the eastern continent. She had been a military strategist before her capture, and as her mental clarity returned, she began planning something that had never been attempted in the history of the Vorthak Empire. A coordinated slave uprising across multiple worlds. The underground network had grown beyond a single planet. Humans on 17 different worlds had established contact through various means. Some worked in communication centers and could send hidden messages. Others were transported between facilities and carried information with them. A few had even been sold to different Vorthak lords and taken to other star systems. The plan that emerged was ambitious beyond anything the Vorthak could imagine. On a single coordinated day, human slaves across 17 worlds would simultaneously revolt. They would target critical infrastructure, capture weapons and vehicles, and free other enslaved species to join the rebellion. The timing would be crucial. The uprisings had to happen before the Vorthak could communicate between worlds and coordinate their response. Success on one world would be meaningless if the Empire could bring its full military might to bear on isolated rebellions. Myung-ho. Jung had been assigned to maintenance work at a major communication hub. As his collar's influence weakened, he began planning the most important mission of the entire rebellion, capturing the planet's primary communication array. The facility was heavily guarded, but the guards were focused on external threats, not on the maintenance slaves who worked inside the building every day. Myung-ho had mapped every corridor, every security system, every weak point in the installation's defenses. He assembled a team of humans with specific skills, former soldiers like So-min Kang, who had completely overcome her collar and was teaching combat techniques to others, engineers like Yuna Lee, who understood both human and Vorthak technology, communications experts like Yunbi Han, who could operate the alien equipment once they captured it. The plan was to take the communication center during the shift change when security was lightest. They would hold it long enough to send coordinated signals to the other worlds, then use it to disrupt Vorthak military communications across the entire sector. Hyun-oh worked in a facility that housed slaves from many different species. As the human rebellion developed, she began reaching out to other enslaved beings. Most were too broken by years of collar control to be useful, but some retained enough awareness to understand what the humans were offering. The response was mixed. Some species were terrified of the consequences of rebellion and refused to participate. Others were interested, but doubted that success was possible. A few, however, were eager to join any effort to strike back at their oppressors. The most useful allies came from a species called the Keth, who had been enslaved for over 50 years. They were naturally strong and had retained more of their original intelligence than most collar victims. When they learned that the humans had found a way to overcome the neural devices, several volunteered to help with the uprising. The rebellion grew beyond just humans. It became a coalition of enslaved beings from across the galaxy, united by their desire for freedom and their hatred of the Vorthak Empire. Jinwoo Park found himself in an unexpected position. As word of the planned uprising spread through the network, humans began looking to him for leadership. He had been their commander during the journey from Earth, and many still saw him as their natural leader. The neural collar had suppressed his leadership abilities for months, but as his mind cleared, those instincts returned. He began coordinating between different groups, helping to refine the overall strategy and preparing for the massive challenge ahead. The plan they developed was complex but necessary. The initial uprising would target key facilities on each world: communication centers, power plants, weapons depots, and transportation hubs. Once these were secured, the rebels would free other slaves and expand their operations. The goal was not just to escape, but to completely disrupt the Vorthak slave system. If they could free enough slaves and capture enough resources, they might be able to threaten the Empire's core worlds and force a complete change in the galactic balance of power. 3 days before the planned uprising, disaster nearly struck. A Vorthak overseer noticed unusual behavior among the human slaves in one facility. The humans were moving with more purpose, communicating more than usual, and showing signs of increased intelligence. Enforcer Grix investigated personally. He ordered random collar inspections and increased surveillance on the human work crews. Several humans were taken for individual questioning about their activities and mental state. The network held. Those who were questioned gave only confused, simple answers that satisfied the aliens' expectations. The unusual behaviors were attributed to minor collar malfunctions that would be corrected with routine maintenance. But the close call reminded everyone how dangerous their situation was. If the Vorthak discovered the full extent of human adaptation to the collars, they would either kill the rebels immediately or develop new control methods that could not be overcome. The uprising had to happen soon, before their secret was discovered, as the final day approached. Humans across 17 worlds made their last preparations. Weapons were hidden in maintenance areas. Guard schedules were memorized. Escape routes were planned. Messages were prepared for transmission to Earth, warning humanity about the coming invasion fleet. Most importantly, the humans prepared themselves mentally for what they were about to attempt. They were not just fighting for their own freedom, but for every enslaved being in the galaxy. They were challenging an empire that had dominated space for thousands of years. The neural collars still hummed around their necks, but now the devices felt like nothing more than uncomfortable jewelry. The humans had learned to think around them, to overcome them, and finally to ignore them entirely. Tomorrow they would find out if human adaptability was truly stronger than Vorthak technology. Tomorrow, they would either win their freedom or die in the attempt. But they would no longer be slaves. The uprising began at dawn across 17 worlds simultaneously. On Keth Prime, Myung-Ho Jung led his team through the corridors of the communication center just as the night shift was ending. The guards were tired and distracted, expecting nothing more dangerous than routine maintenance work. The humans moved like ghosts through the facility. Somin Kang disabled security cameras with techniques she remembered from her military training. Yuna Lee bypassed electronic locks using her understanding of Vorthak technology. Within minutes, they had reached the main communication array without raising any alarms. The first guard they encountered died before he could sound a warning. More Vorthak soldiers rushed to investigate, but they found themselves facing humans, who no longer moved like confused slaves. These were trained fighters who had been planning this moment for months. Yunbi Han reached the primary console and began transmitting the coordinated signals to other worlds. Her fingers flew across the alien controls as she sent the simple message that would change galactic history. Now! Strike now! Across the 17 worlds, humans received the signal and launched their attacks. On the mining world of Vextar, Hyunwoo Choi led a charge against the power plant that supplied energy to the slave compounds. On the industrial planet Mordun, Do-Yun Lee and his team seized control of the central computer systems that coordinated all slave labor. The Vorthak were caught completely unprepared. In thousands of years of running their slave empire, they had never faced organized resistance. Their security systems were designed to prevent escapes, not to handle coordinated military attacks from within their own facilities. On Keth Prime, Jinwoo Park led the assault on the main weapons depot. The building was heavily fortified, but the humans had been studying its defenses for months. They knew exactly where the weak points were and how to exploit them. The battle was fierce but brief. The Vorthak guards fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. When the depot fell, thousands of energy weapons and military vehicles became available to the human rebels. Heian-Oh worked to free the other enslaved species as soon as the initial objectives were secured. Many were too broken by years of collar control to be immediately useful, but some retained enough spirit to join the fight. The rebellion grew from thousands to tens of thousands as liberated slaves took up arms against their former masters. The most crucial moment came when Tae-hyun, Shin's team, reached the Collar Control Center. This facility managed the neural inhibitor devices for the entire planet. If they could shut it down, every enslaved being on Keth Prime would be freed from mental suppression. The building was the most heavily defended target they had chosen. Vorthak elite troops had been rushed there as soon as the uprising began. The battle raged for hours, with humans using captured weapons and vehicles against alien soldiers in powered armor. But human determination proved stronger than Vorthak technology. The control center fell, and across the planet, millions of neural collars went silent. Enslaved beings who had not had a clear thought in years suddenly found their minds restored. The effect was immediate and devastating to Vorthak control. Slaves who had been docile workers minutes before became an angry mob seeking revenge. The few remaining Vorthak installations were overwhelmed by sheer numbers as every enslaved being on the planet joined the rebellion. Similar scenes played out across all 17 worlds. The coordinated nature of the attack prevented the Vorthak from responding effectively. By the time they understood the scope of the rebellion, they had lost control of entire star systems. Overlord Thex tried desperately to coordinate a counterattack from his command ship in orbit around Keth Prime, but the humans had captured the planet's communication arrays and were jamming his signals. He could not contact other Vorthak commanders or call for reinforcements. When human-controlled surface-to-air weapons began targeting his ship, he was forced to retreat. For the first time in Vorthak history, their military forces were fleeing. From former slaves, the rebellion's success exceeded even the most optimistic human projections. Within 3 days, 17 worlds had been completely liberated. The Vorthak slave empire, built over thousands of years, had suffered a catastrophic collapse in less than a week. But the humans were not finished. Using captured Vorthak ships and technology, they began spreading the rebellion to other worlds. The knowledge of how to overcome neural collars spread like wildfire through the galaxy's enslaved populations. Dong-Yun Cho found himself teaching his techniques to beings from dozens of different species. Each required slightly different approaches, but the basic principle remained the same. Any intelligent mind could learn to overcome the Vorthak control technology if given proper instruction. The Empire's economy began to crumble as world after world fell to slave uprisings. Without their forced labor, the Vorthak could not maintain their industrial production or military expansion. Planets that had been loyal members of the Empire began to reconsider their allegiances as human liberation fleets appeared in their systems. Yunseo Park established the Galactic Liberation Council from the former Vorthak capital world, which had been captured by human forces in a daring raid. Representatives from dozens of freed species gathered to coordinate their efforts and plan for a post-Vorthak future. The neural inhibitor collars, once symbols of oppression, were transformed by human ingenuity. Hyunwoo Choi led a team of scientists in redesigning the devices to enhance mental capabilities rather than suppress them. The voluntary cognitive enhancement collars allowed humans to interface directly with alien technology and understand complex systems that had previously been beyond their comprehension. The irony was not lost on anyone. The very devices that were meant to enslave humanity had become tools of liberation and advancement. The Vorthak's greatest weapon had been turned against them by the adaptability they had never bothered to understand. Minho Kim established the Terran Liberation Fleet, using captured Vorthak warships retrofitted with human improvements. The fleet's mission was not conquest, but protection. They would ensure that no species would ever again face the slavery that humanity had endured. The first major test of this commitment came when they detected the Vorthak invasion fleet heading toward Earth. The aliens had launched their planned raid on humanity's homeworld just before the rebellion began, and the massive slave ships were now only weeks away from their target. The Liberation Fleet intercepted them at the edge of Earth's solar system. The battle was one-sided. The Vorthak ships were designed for capturing helpless civilians, not for fighting against military forces that understood their technology and tactics. When the Liberation ships entered Earth's atmosphere, they carried a simple message broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Commander Jinwoo Park of the Terran Liberation Fleet. Humanity remembers what it means to be chained. We have broken every chain we found, and we will break every chain we find." The transformation was complete. In less than 2 years, humans had gone from being captured colonists to leaders of a galactic liberation movement. The neural collars that once hummed with oppressive energy now enhanced their capabilities and connected them to technologies across the galaxy. The Vorthak Empire was finished, reduced to a few scattered worlds trying to maintain their independence. Most Vorthak chose to surrender and accept the new galactic order rather than face the wrath of the species they had enslaved for so long. The chains and shackles remained, but they had become something entirely different. What had once been instruments of oppression were now symbols of liberation, worn voluntarily by those who chose to enhance their minds and connect with the broader galactic community. The humans had kept their promise. They had broken every chain they found, and in doing so, they had freed not just themselves, but an entire galaxy from thousands of years of oppression. The same energy that had driven them to survive their enslavement now drove them to ensure that freedom would spread to every corner of space.